They called me worthless. They called me a burden. My own family laughed whenever I tried to prove I was capable of more. But none of them expected the day the commander-in-chief himself would stand before me, look me in the eyes, and declare to the world, "You saved more lives than anyone here." And that, dear listener, was the moment everything changed. Growing up in my family was like living under a microscope that only highlighted flaws. My name is Eleanor Briggs, and I was the middle child, the one everyone thought was too fragile, too weak, too ordinary. My older brother, Daniel, was the golden boy, varsity athlete, honor roll student, the kind of child parents boasted about in church and neighborhood barbecues. My younger sister, Megan, was the prodigy with a violin, invited to perform at concerts before she turned 12. And then there was me. I wasn't terrible at anything, but I wasn't extraordinary at anything either. My grades were average. My athletic ability was non-existent. My one true gift was empathy. I listened, I comforted, I noticed details others didn't. But in a family obsessed with trophies, medals, and applause, empathy didn't count as an achievement. "Why can't you be more like Daniel?" my father would ask whenever I came home with A B on my report card. "Even Megan knows how to impress people," my mother would sigh. "What do you even do with your time, Eleanor?" At first, I tried. I signed up for soccer, then quit after one season when I realized no one wanted the slowest girl on the field. I auditioned for choir, but my trembling voice cracked. I entered spelling bees, science fairs, debate clubs, always finishing in the middle, never first, never noticed. That was when the nicknames started. Worthless Eleanor. It began as a whisper from my siblings when they thought I wasn't listening. Then it became a joke at the dinner table. Finally, it was practically a label stamped on my forehead. I remember one Christmas vividly. I was 15, and my grandmother asked each of us what we wanted to become in the future. Daniel announced doctor, and everyone applauded. Megan said world-famous musician, and everyone nodded with pride. When it was my turn, I hesitated. I didn't know yet. I was still searching. Before I could speak, Daniel leaned back in his chair and laughed. "Grandma, don't bother asking Eleanor. She's worthless. She'll probably just, I don't know, sit around doing nothing." The room erupted in laughter. My parents chuckled, my aunt smirked. Even my grandmother pursed her lips like maybe he wasn't entirely wrong. And me? I smiled through the sting in my chest. Because what else could I do? Years went by, and I learned to play the role of the background character in my own family. I was the one asked to set the table, to take the photo, to stay home and feed the dog while everyone else went on trips. I told myself it didn't matter, that one day, somehow, I'd prove them wrong. But deep down, the words burrowed like splinters. Worthless, useless burden. And those words came roaring back when the crisis hit. It began one ordinary morning. I had just started working at a small, local hospital, not as a doctor or nurse, but as a clerk in the emergency wing. My job was paperwork, scheduling, guiding families to waiting rooms. To my family, it wasn't a real job. Glorified secretary, my brother sneered when I told him. Guess that's the best you could do. But when the flood struck our city, that so-called glorified secretary role became something else entirely. The storm that night was relentless. Rivers broke their banks. Roads turned into torrents. The hospital was flooded with survivors, children shivering in soaked clothes, elderly men carried in on stretchers, mothers clutching infants. Staff were overwhelmed. Doctors were running from room to room. Nurses screamed orders, alarms blared. And in the chaos, people were slipping through the cracks. I remember looking around and realizing no one was coordinating. No one was keeping track of who had come in, who needed care, who was still missing. The doctors were too busy saving one person at a time. But someone had to step back and see the bigger picture. And for the first time in my life, I didn't wait for permission. I grabbed clipboards, shouted to volunteers, organized triage zones, and began tracking every single name and face. I matched children to their parents, logged medical needs, and directed people where to go. Hours blurred into days. I slept on the hospital floor, surviving on vending machine snacks. My hands cramped from writing, my voice cracked from shouting. But the chaos started to take shape. Families were reunited because of my notes. Supplies reached the right rooms because of my lists. Lives were saved not because I wielded a scalpel, but because I gave order to the storm. And yet, when the waters finally receded, I returned home to silence. My family barely looked up from their phones when I walked in, still in the same clothes I had worn for 3 days. "You look exhausted," my mother muttered. "Yeah, well," Daniel said, scrolling, "it's not like you were actually doing the hard work. Leave that to the real professionals." I wanted to scream, I saved lives, but I didn't, because in their eyes, I was still the worthless one. What none of US knew was that the hospital had reported our emergency response to the government. And weeks later, a formal ceremony was arranged to honor those who had contributed during the disaster. When I received the letter of invitation, I nearly laughed. They must have sent this to the wrong person. But no, it was addressed to me, Eleanor Briggs. Still, I didn't tell my family. I knew they'd roll their eyes, call it another participation award. I simply went alone, dressed in the best outfit I could afford, my heart hammering in my chest. And that was the day my family's words cracked in half. Because as I stood in that crowded hall, surrounded by decorated soldiers, doctors, and first responders, the commander-in-chief himself walked to the podium. His eyes scanned the room, and then he stopped on me. "You," he said, pointing straight at me. "You saved more lives than anyone here." I froze. The cameras flashed. The room erupted in applause. And in that single sentence, the years of ridicule, the laughter, the worthless label, they all shattered. I wasn't just somebody. I was a hero. And for the first time in my life, I stood taller than every insult ever thrown at me. The applause that day was loud, but the silence at home was louder. When the ceremony ended, I returned to my tiny apartment clutching the certificate and medal the commander-in-chief had handed me. The words still echoed in my ears. "You saved more lives than anyone here." I wanted to savor that moment, to let it fill the cracks my family had carved into me for years. But I also knew eventually they would find out. News spread fast, and when it came from the television instead of my lips, I braced myself for the storm. Sure enough, it happened on a Sunday afternoon. I was curled on my sofa, half-dozing when my phone buzzed nonstop. Calls, messages, notifications. Confused, I switched on the TV, just in time to see my own face splashed across the news. The clip replayed, the commander-in-chief pointing at me, his words booming. "She saved more lives than anyone here." The camera zoomed in on me, looking stunned, pale, eyes wide with disbelief. I hadn't realized I was crying until I saw it replayed. And then my phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. "Eleanor," she said the moment I answered. Her voice was tight. What is this we're seeing on the news?" My throat went dry. It's the ceremony. The hospital nominated me." "You didn't tell us." Her voice sharpened. "I didn't think you'd." "Think we'd what? Care? Eleanor, do you know how this looks? Your brother has been working for years to get recognition, and now you, of all people, are being plastered on TV." I blinked, stunned. "Mom, this isn't about Daniel. This was about the flood, the people who—" But she had already passed the phone. Daniel's voice thundered through. "Are you kidding me, Eleanor? You saved more lives than trained doctors? Than soldiers? Do you realize how ridiculous that sounds?" The commander-in-chief must have been making some kind of PR stunt. Heat rose to my cheeks. I kept records. I organized triage. You handed out clipboards, he snapped. "You've been sitting behind a desk your whole life. Don't act like some war hero. God, Eleanor, you're making us look like fools." The words struck me harder than I expected. After everything, they were still calling me worthless, just dressed in new clothes. Fraud, fluke, embarrassment. I hung up before my voice cracked. Over the next week, the story spread. Neighbors congratulated me. My coworkers left little notes on my desk. Proud of you. You did what none of us could. But my family? Their silence deepened. They didn't attend the follow-up community celebration. They didn't call with congratulations. Instead, I began to hear whispers. My aunt called to say my mother had been telling people it was all exaggerated. My cousin messaged me that Daniel had posted online about fake heroes getting undeserved praise. Even Megan, who used to at least smile at me, shared a cryptic quote. Some people shine only when the cameras are on. It hurt, more than I wanted to admit, because I had secretly hoped, just a little, that this recognition would finally make them see me. Instead, it made their jealousy sharper. The breaking point came at a family dinner I couldn't avoid. My grandmother's birthday. Everyone was there, relatives packed into the dining room, laughter bouncing off the walls. The moment I stepped in, the laughter dimmed. I saw eyes flick toward me, then away. Daniel leaned back in his chair, smirking. Well, if it isn't the savior herself. Should we all clap, or do you need the commander-in-chief to tell us when? Laughter rippled around the table. My cheeks burned, but I stayed calm. I didn't come here to argue, I said softly. No, you came here to brag, Megan cut in, twirling her fork. That's all this is. You've been waiting your whole life for attention. And now that you've gotten it, you think you're better than us. I set my jaw. I never said I was better. I only did what needed to be done when no one else would. Daniel's laugh was sharp. Listen to her, acting like some kind of chosen one. Eleanor, wake up. You're still the same, worthless, just with a shiny medal to hide it. The room erupted again. Aunts whispered. Uncles chuckled nervously. My mother sat stiff, saying nothing, but her silence was worse than words. I stared at them, my family, the people I once begged to love me, and something inside me cracked, but not in the way it used to. For the first time, the sting faded. The shame didn't stick, because no matter what they said, no matter how they twisted it, the commander-in-chief's words still lived inside me. You saved more lives than anyone here. And that truth was louder than their jealousy. That night, I walked home alone, medal heavy in my pocket. Their laughter echoed behind me, but my steps were steady, because while they clung to their old version of me, the world had already seen the truth. And I knew, deep in my bones, that their jealousy wasn't proof of my weakness, it was proof of my growth. They once called me worthless. Now, strangers call me by a new name, hero. In the weeks after the commander-in-chief's words went public, my life began shifting in ways I never imagined. At first, it was little things, neighbors stopping me at the grocery store, thanking me for being there during the flood. My old high school teacher sent me a letter that read, I always knew you had something special in you. But then came invitations. A local charity asked me to speak at their fundraiser. A news station invited me for a short interview. The hospital offered me a new position, coordinator for emergency preparedness. They said, you clearly have a gift for seeing the bigger picture. We need that. For the first time in my life, people weren't looking past me. They were looking to me. It was dizzying and terrifying and thrilling all at once. The first big event was a community forum hosted in the city's civic hall. I almost didn't go. I stared at the invitation for days, terrified I'd stutter or make a fool of myself. But when I stood at the podium, something inside me shifted. I looked at the faces in the crowd, parents, children, volunteers, doctors, and remembered the chaos of that night, the fear in their eyes, the relief when order began to return. And the words just flowed. I wasn't the strongest person in that hospital. I wasn't the fastest, but I saw people slipping through the cracks, and I refused to let them vanish. That's all it was, seeing people when no one else did. Sometimes that's enough. The hall erupted in applause. People stood, and I felt something I had never felt at home, belonging. But the more the world lifted me up, the more my family tried to drag me back down. Daniel posted bitter messages online. Funny how some people get credit for paperwork while the real heroes go unnoticed. Megan stopped answering my texts altogether. When she finally did, it was to sneer, "Enjoy your 15 minutes, Eleanor. Fame doesn't last." And my mother? She invited me to dinner one night, only to spend the entire evening warning me not to let it get to my head. "You know, Eleanor," she said, stirring her tea, "the commander-in-chief probably just said that for the cameras. Don't think it means you're suddenly important. You'll embarrass yourself." I looked at her across the table and, for the first time, didn't feel the need to argue, because I realized something. Her words weren't truth anymore. They were fear. Fear that her favorite insult no longer fit. The real test came when I was invited to a regional leadership conference. The guest list included first responders, military officers, and government officials. My name was printed on the same line as theirs. I could almost hear Daniel scoffing in my head. "You don't belong there, Eleanor." But when I walked into that room, wearing a simple navy dress I'd saved up for, people didn't look at me with mockery. They nodded, extended hands, introduced themselves with respect. One colonel even said, "Ah, you're the one the commander-in-chief mentioned. I've heard about your coordination work. Impressive. Impressive." That single word echoed in my chest like a bomb. I carried it home like a shield against every worthless my family had ever thrown at me. Still, I couldn't help but think of them as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling. Why couldn't they just be proud? Why did every step I took forward make them dig their claws deeper into resentment? It hit me then. My family had built their identity around me being lesser. If I rose, their foundation cracked. My success exposed the lie they'd told themselves, that only Daniel and Megan mattered. And so they clung to the lie, even as the world saw the truth. The next time I saw them, at a cousin's engagement party, the tension was so thick it clung to the air. Cousins whispered, "That's Eleanor, the one from the news," while Daniel sat sulking in the corner. Megan kept her back to me the entire night. Finally, Daniel stormed up, glass in hand, his face flushed. "Enjoying yourself, Eleanor? Playing hero for the cameras?" I met his glare with calm. "I didn't play anything, Daniel. I just did what needed to be done." He laughed, bitter. "You'll fade back into nothing soon enough. You always do." But I didn't fade. I smiled, turned away, and continued talking to the people who actually wanted me there. And for the first time, Daniel's words didn't follow me. They stayed behind, small and bitter, while I walked toward something bigger. That night, I realized something powerful. I didn't need my family's applause anymore. I had the world's. And the more they tried to bury me, the taller I grew. They mocked me for being worthless. Now that I wasn't, they wanted to make me worthless again. At first, their bitterness was just words, snide comments, rolled eyes, online posts dripping with envy. But words have a way of growing sharper, and soon my family began turning them into actions. It began subtly. At the hospital, where I had been promoted to emergency preparedness coordinator, I noticed strange rumors floating around. Colleagues whispered that I had embellished my role during the flood, that the commander-in-chief's praise was exaggerated. One evening, my supervisor called me into her office. "Eleanor," she said carefully, "we've been hearing some questions about your story. Do you know if anyone in your family has been speaking to the press?" My stomach sank. Only one name came to mind: Daniel. Sure enough, I later found an article online quoting an anonymous source close to Eleanor's family, claiming I had done nothing more than hand out papers, while the real heroes saved lives. Anonymous. But I knew. I confronted Daniel over the phone. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded. He didn't even flinch. "Because you don't deserve it, Eleanor. You're stealing credit from people who actually matter. I'm not going to let you ride this wave of sympathy forever." Sympathy. That's what he thought my recognition was. I hung up, shaking, tears burning my eyes. For years, I had thought his cruelty was childish teasing. But now I saw it for what it was, fear. Fear that his golden pedestal was crumbling. But Daniel wasn't the only one. Megan began to chime in too. She posted online that I was milking tragedy for attention. At a family gathering, she smirked across the table and said, "Tell us, Eleanor, how many cameras will you bring next time you save lives?" The words stung less than they once would have, but the intent was sharper. They weren't just mocking me. They were trying to destroy me. The worst blow came from my mother. I received an email one morning, forwarded from a national nonprofit that had invited me to join their advisory board. "Dear Ms. Briggs," it read, "unfortunately, we've received concerning testimony about your integrity and must withdraw our invitation at this time." My hands trembled as I scrolled. Attached was a letter, signed by none other than my mother. She had written that I had always exaggerated stories, that I was unstable, and that she feared I was using fabricated heroics for attention. I couldn't breathe. My own mother, the woman whose approval I had chased my entire life. That night, I sat on my bed clutching the letter, numb. For a moment, I felt like the 15-year-old girl again, laughed at over Christmas dinner, worthless, invisible. But then, I remembered the commander-in-chief's words, the medal, the faces of the families I had reunited during the flood, and something inside me hardened. No, I wasn't worthless. Not anymore. Instead of hiding, I doubled down. At the hospital, I worked harder than ever. I led drills, created systems, and spoke at events. Each time I stood at a podium, I could almost feel my family's eyes watching from the shadows. And each time, I thought, "You tried to break me, but I'm still standing." But the more I rose, the more desperate they became. At another family dinner, Daniel slammed his fist on the table. "You think you're so great because some politician said your name once. Newsflash, Eleanor. Fame fades, and when it does, you'll have nothing." I met his glare, calm but steady. "If that's true, why are you so afraid of me keeping it?" The room went silent. His face flushed, but he said nothing more. For once, I had the final word. The sabotage continued, false rumors, whispers, attempts to erase my credibility. But with each attack, I found something I never had before: allies. My coworkers defended me. Community leaders stood by me. The commander-in-chief's office even released a statement reaffirming their recognition of my role. And in that support, I discovered something my family could never take away: proof that I didn't need their validation. The little girl who once begged for their approval was gone. In her place stood a woman who had survived betrayal, jealousy, and sabotage, and still kept walking forward. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the medal on my nightstand, a single thought crystallized in my mind. If my family wanted to break me, they would have to watch me rise instead. And that, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all. They wanted to make me small again. Instead, they became the fuel that made me grow. The moment I realized I didn't need their approval, a new kind of freedom opened before me. For years, my family's words had chained me: worthless, useless, invisible. Now, their sabotage only reminded me of how far I'd come. And I decided to do something they could never take away. I built something bigger than myself. It began with an idea. One afternoon, as I left the hospital after another round of emergency drills, I passed a group of volunteers chatting outside. They were young, eager, but untrained. They had heart, but not the skills to handle real crises. And I thought, what if we trained them? Not just volunteers, but ordinary people, shopkeepers, teachers, parents. People who never thought they'd be heroes until the day came when they had no choice. I pitched the idea to the hospital board, a civilian emergency response program. Simple workshops, basic training, community teams ready to act before professional help could arrive. To my surprise, they said yes. Soon, I was standing in a gymnasium filled with folding chairs and nervous faces. "I know you think you're not ready," I told them, "but neither was I, and still I made a difference. So can you." The program grew. Small towns called asking for workshops. Local leaders invited me to share the model. News outlets picked it up. Formerly overlooked woman leads civilian training movement. For the first time, I wasn't just a survivor of betrayal or a symbol of luck. I was a builder. But with every headline, my family's bitterness deepened. Daniel posted angrily, "She's not saving lives, she's playing pretend. This is dangerous. She'll get people hurt." Megan sneered online, "Of course Eleanor's running classes. She loves attention more than anything." And my mother, she called late one night, voice dripping with ice. "Eleanor, stop this madness before you embarrass us all even more. You're dragging our family name through the mud." I sat in silence for a long moment before answering. "No, Mom. I'm cleaning the mud off my name. You just don't like how bright it shines underneath." Click. She hung up. Still, I pressed on. Months passed, and the program expanded statewide. One day, I opened an envelope to find a letter from the Commander-in-Chief's office. "We commend your leadership and vision. Your initiative has set a precedent for community resilience nationwide. You are making history." I read it 3 times, tears streaming. Not because of the praise, but because it was undeniable proof. Proof that what my family tried to destroy had become unshakable. Then, something happened that shifted everything. At a regional event, I was asked to speak after a panel of decorated military officers. I felt small at first, standing in their shadow. But when I told the story of the flood, not with grandeur, but with raw honesty, the room stilled. Afterward, a colonel shook my hand firmly. "You've done what most of us never could, Eleanor. You've made everyday people believe they matter. That's leadership." That word again. Leadership. It stuck. But leadership came with visibility, and visibility drew critics. One morning, as I was preparing for another workshop, a journalist cornered me. "We've received claims from your family that you fabricated your role during the flood. Care to comment?" For a moment, the old fear threatened to crawl back. The old Eleanor, the one who shrank under their words. But then I lifted my chin. My record speaks for itself. The Commander-in-Chief's recognition speaks for itself. And this program, it speaks louder than any rumor. The article came out days later. Headline: Family Doubts Hero's Story. Community proves otherwise. Because alongside my family's bitter quotes were testimonies from dozens of people I had helped, volunteers, doctors, parents, survivors of the flood. Their voices drowned out the venom, and for the first time I felt untouchable. Meanwhile, my family began to unravel. Daniel's bitterness bled into his work, and colleagues distanced themselves. Megan's constant online jabs earned her ridicule. My mother, once proud of her perfect children, now found herself whispered about at church. Why can't she be proud of her daughter? Their empire of scorn was collapsing, and all I had to do was keep building mine. One night, standing in front of a hall packed with volunteers, I realized the truth. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't shouting or pointing fingers or proving them wrong. It was standing there with hundreds of people listening, knowing that my life meant something, knowing that the girl they had called worthless was now creating a legacy. They once called me worthless. Now, they couldn't even say my name without tasting regret. The day everything shifted forever began like any other. I was preparing for the state recognition ceremony, an event to honor community leaders for their contributions during crises. My program had been nominated for a national award, and I had been asked to attend as a keynote speaker. I almost declined, not because I didn't want to go, but because I had grown tired of the spotlight. Yet something inside me whispered, "Go. This is the moment they will see." So I went. The auditorium was massive, glittering with chandeliers, the kind of place I once thought only belonged to people who mattered. But that night I belonged there, and fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of timing, because seated just 3 rows back in plain view were my mother, Daniel and Megan. I froze for a moment when I saw them. Daniel's jaw was tight, Megan's arms folded. My mother's lips pursed into that familiar, disapproving line. They hadn't come to support me. They had come to watch me fail. The ceremony began. Names were called, medals were pinned, applause thundered. Finally, the MC stepped to the microphone. "Our next honoree," he said, "is a woman who turned her pain into purpose. A woman once overlooked, now leading a movement that has inspired communities nationwide. Please welcome Eleanor Briggs." The applause was deafening. Cameras flashed. I walked to the stage, my heart pounding, my family's eyes burning into my back. I took a breath, and then I spoke. I was never the loudest voice in my family. In fact, I was often the one told to be quiet, to step aside, to accept that I was less. For years, I believed it. But then, in one night of chaos and fear, I discovered something. I wasn't weak. I wasn't worthless. I was someone who could make a difference, even if the world refused to see it. And when the commander-in-chief recognized me, it wasn't validation I craved, it was liberation. Liberation from the voices that told me I was nothing. I paused, my gaze sweeping the room. For a moment, my eyes landed on Daniel's scowl, Megan's narrowed glare, my mother's pinched lips. And I smiled. Tonight, I stand here not as the girl who was mocked, but as the woman who proved that worth is not given by family or by critics or by doubters. Worth is something you claim for yourself, and no one can take it away. The room erupted in applause. Some people stood, and for the first time in my life, I didn't shrink. I stood tall. Then came the moment that sealed everything. The commander-in-chief himself took the stage, standing beside me. He raised my hand high, like I was a champion. His voice carried across the hall. "This woman has saved more lives, directly and indirectly, than most of us could ever hope to. Her legacy will outlive all of us. She is living proof that resilience matters more than ridicule. Tonight, we honor her not just as a citizen, but as a leader." I didn't have to look at my family. I could feel it, the silence, the humiliation, the undeniable truth pressing down on them. For years, they had told me I was nothing, but now the most powerful voice in the country declared me something greater than even I had believed. After the ceremony, people crowded around me for photos and congratulations. I answered with grace, smiling, thanking them. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my family slipping out, their faces pale and stiff. But one moment stopped me. Daniel approached, lingering at the edge of the crowd. His usual arrogance had cracked. His voice was low, bitter. "You really think you're better than us now, don't you?" I turned to him, calm. "No, Daniel. I've always been better than the lies you told me. I just finally stopped believing them." He had no reply. The weeks after the ceremony were a whirlwind. The program received national funding. Volunteers signed up by the hundreds. Schools, towns, even small villages began adopting the model. And my family? They drifted further into obscurity. At church, people whispered about my mother's cruelty. Daniel's bitterness cost him opportunities. Megan's constant envy made her a pariah among friends. The same voices that once laughed with them now laughed at them. And I didn't need to lift a finger. One evening, I sat alone in my apartment, the metal gleaming softly on the table beside me. The phone buzzed. It was a message from Megan. "I still don't like you, but I can't deny it anymore. You did what we never could. Maybe you weren't worthless after all." I didn't reply, because I didn't need her words anymore. That night, I went to bed with a peace I had never known. Not because I had destroyed them, but because I had outgrown them. My revenge wasn't in their humiliation, though it came. My revenge was in my survival, my rise, my refusal to be small. I had built a life beyond their reach, and that I realized was the sweetest revenge of all.